Well, Pete, have you ever done a podcast before?
Yes, but I'm not the expert. I normally sit on this side and the guy's doing the podcast. I just chat.
There we go. Well, that's what we want to do. We just want to chat.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I typically do a terrible job of introducing people, but I'll do a really good job today. Peet Van Der Merwe, thank you and welcome to the Blood Origins podcast.
Nice, and thank you for having me. I really looking forward to our podcast and our discussion this afternoon.
It's not often that you get two South Africans on a podcast together, so it's a rarity, and it's people are going to really enjoy it because there's two good accents on the podcast right now. But Pete, where are you from? What do you do? Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I actually grew up on a farm, so I love the outdoors. I came to study in Northwestern University. In those days, it was still the PhD for Christian Higher Education, CHE, Potchefstroom University, the CHE, Christian Higher Education way back, and now it is changed in 2004 to Northwestern University. So I'm here, and I think due to my background, I always wanted to be in conservation, and I ended up studying tourism.
Didn't all South African boys want to be like a game ranger and wildlife conservation, right?
Yeah. And reading all the Gustos magazines and things, and I think that's what I want to do. Yeah, and in the end, in 1995, I did my honors degree and the end of apartheid and those things. And I see that tourism is going to, I saw a future in tourism. So I started going into tourism. I did my honors in tourism management at that stage, and then I do my master's and later on my PhD. And obviously, as I do have a love for wildlife and outdoors, I focused on that in my PhD as well. So my PhD study looked on the sustainable game farm industry. And as all will need to focus area and research, I started my research focus area on natural area tourism. And I focus on all four legs, ecotourism, wildlife tourism, adventure tourism, and geotourism. So that's my background. I'm also a National Research Foundation C2 rated researcher. Yeah, and I love outdoors and I love the wildlife.
So were you raised on a farm, Pete? Is that what?
Yeah, I grew up on a farm. Well, I'm still involved in farming. I still have a cattle farm where I go. I'm actually leaving on Wednesday to go and fix some broken stuff. A farm's always got something that breaks down, so you need to go and fix that. And I've got some wildlife on the farm, but I'm not farming with wildlife. Or I do some hunting occasionally for myself and some friends. And as people really like to come and hunt on the farm, I allow them. I'm not really into hunting in a corporate way, but I enjoy hunting as well. And we eat a lot of, my purpose for hunting is mainly game meat. My sons is also grown up. Oldest is 22 and the other one is 19 almost. And they start taking over the hunting. So I'm just driving around with them and help them. Nowadays, I'm picking up the scratches, or if I don't hunt anything, I maybe get a chance. But yeah, so I grew up on a farm and I love the wildlife stuff.
Pete, do you think that you talked about, you got into the understanding and thinking about tourism writ large?
Mm.
You know, one of the things that I got a question about was the sort of addressing, like, why do I separate between differences in tourism between photographic ecotourism and hunting tourism? Is there a difference?
Yeah, well, if you want to go into terminology, if one going to go into terminology, if one look at nature-based tourism, I explained the four pillars to you. And both that four pillars, let's start with ecotourism. Ecotourism, and I sometimes call it the pristine type of nature-based tourism. I mean, that is where the community must benefit. There must be educational purposes and building into your visit at this game reserve. It must be pure nature. It must be no impact on the wildlife and those type of things, and they don't allow any consumptive usage. That is in broad what it's all about, and obviously must make economic contribution and a social contribution to local communities. Whereas one look at wildlife tourism, which focus on the consumptive and the non-consumptive part, you will see that the consumptive part, obviously hunting and fishing, that is our consumptive part. But the wildlife tourism, a non-consumptive part, is mostly photographic safaris. And that means that Somebody can be in the wild, taking some photos or just driving around, but it's about wildlife. It's not necessary to say contribute to communities or there's educational experience or small groups. So it's more about interaction just with wildlife. So that is basically the difference between that one. And then you've got your adventure tourism, which is based on adventure stuff, which of course hunting also form part of adventure tourism. That's where the adrenaline rush, accomplish something new that you've never done before, those type of thing. There's a risk involved. And then you've got your geotourism sites, which is mostly like your Vredefort Dome and your Sterkfontein Cave areas, and there's also geotourism sites in Kruger. So that's more or less the difference. Some people speak about nature-based tourism. Others speak about, as I said, natural area tourism. I prefer the concept natural area tourism, and with the 4 different pillars underneath it.
Pete, what is your opinion on the idea that ecotourism, the wildlife, what you just described as wildlife tourism, is, you mentioned it being non-consumptive. One of the arguments is that there's no such thing as non-consumptive tourism. What's your thought there?
No, I mean, I agree with you. I sometimes tell my students that I think your brand as ecotourism is sometimes more consumptive than your hunting tourism. And I will give you an example. I know about a game reserve in Namibia. The guy received around about 9,500 tourists, mostly international tourists from Germany, France, let's say Europe. And he receives around about 40 to 50 hunters per season. Now, if you look at the lodge, and to run a lodge that can accommodate 9,500 people throughout the year, I can't remember the number per night, but it's quite a number per night. And they mostly stay 1 or 2 nights. Short visit, come in, do everything, and leave again. Whereas your overseas tourist, hunter tourists stay for 2 weeks. They do hunt, they do take some animals down, but at the end of the day, only what I want to say is very important, they almost generate the same income as these 9,500 tourists going through. So it's on the same game reserve. It is zoned. So it's got the zone for hunting, it's got the zone for ecotourism. So it's a big game reserve, about 30,000 hectares plus. So if you look at the number of hunters going through, generating almost the same income versus the number of ecotourists going through, but now, I mean, those guys need to drink water, you need to do the linen, they need to prepare food. And as you just stated, who is consuming the most out of nature? The 9,500 tourists coming through, or the 50 hunters going through? Yes, they hunt, but it's sustainably used. No hunter or game farm owner will hunt more than he can sort of his offspring. So we have no cases in South Africa or Southern Africa, private owned places where people hunted all their wildlife. It's always done in sustainable use. And if you look at South Africa and Namibia, we've got more wildlife now than 60 years ago due to the private industry. So coming back to your question, no, if you look at ecotourists, they still need to fly to this destination. So they've got a big carbon footprint. The same with your hunters, but again, the volume of your ecotourist is much bigger than the volume of your hunting tourist, and you generate the same income already.
Yeah, I thought I saw a statistic out in Namibia, something, and that you just corroborated it. Something like 1 to 77. One hunter to cover the same economic impacts as 77 ecotourists.
Yeah. Well, to give you an example, here in South Africa, our latest statistic, but we will discuss that maybe later on. European of overseas hunters spent 450,000 rand in South Africa. It's more or less $25,000 per hunting trip. And now my question is, and if you look at our local hunters, they spend in the area of 63,000 rand per season in South Africa, more or less 3 hunting trips per year, but they do. Now my question always, and it's not just about money always, but I mean, which other tourists do spend that high and also contribute to conservation? Because they do contribute to conservation. That gives that private game farm owner an opportunity again to buy new genetics, to buy new species. And where do they buy it from? Lots of these species are sold by our national parks. So they also generate income from the selling species to the private industry in South Africa. So if you really want some good genetics, you go to the South Africa National Parks game auctions to buy some good genetics from them.
Yeah, you just brought up a question that is very intriguing. And again, I think it's important to state, you currently, right now, your position at Potch, you're a professor, right?
Yes, I'm a professor, and my focus area is wildlife tourism. I also lecture game farm tourism, and I work on the postgraduates. All my postgraduate studies mostly focus on wildlife tourism, nature-based tourism aspects, and all four categories. I'm not just focusing on hunting. I'm focusing on all four, and I'm lecturing at honors also natural area tourism. Yes.
So talk to me. One of the things that I like to talk about, but obviously you being in the tourism business, the research business as well, any sort of tourism, the four pillars we just described, is an economic endeavor at the end of the day.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And if there is an economic endeavor sorry, go ahead.
No. I thought you were done. Continue.
No, the reason I was saying is that in an economic practice, I'm not an economist, but I do need to make a living and I do need to make money. And if I was making money on something, i.e. an asset, like wildlife, it makes sense to me that I would want to grow the asset or sustain the asset.
Yes.
So you said earlier, you've never seen a hunting place wipe out their animals.
No. I mean, even if you look at ecotourism and these type of places, I mean, that's your product that you're selling. If you've got, let's say you've got a normal grocery store. If you sell out all your products, you don't have anything to sell to your clients. Agreed. So what is our product? Our product is wildlife. And we can use it as a consumptive or non-consumptive. Even the people who only focus on wildlife, not hunting, and only focusing on your photographic safaris of ecotourism, at some stage, they need to sell some of that wildlife because, again, I just want to explain this as well. All game reserves and all protected areas in South Africa are fenced. So we have a carrying capacity issue. So if you keep on breeding wildlife on our land, at the end of the day, you're going to exceed your carrying capacity. So even ecotourism destinations maybe sell their wildlife, do auctions and those type of things. Not all can have leopards and lions and predators to eat the wildlife. So coming back to your question, you must use it sustainably because that's your product that you're selling. If you don't have a product to sell, if you've got a lodge, I mean, you can have a beautiful lodge building area and all those 5-star features, but there's no wildlife to see. Who's going to visit your place if it's focused on wildlife? I mean, if it's just scenic, then it's a different thing. But if you're selling wildlife and you have a game reserve, hunting or non-hunting, your product is wildlife. And if you don't look after your product and you don't improve your product, you're going to stay behind.
So it makes no sense to come in and indiscriminately wipe out your wildlife.
Well, I have never heard it in any game reserve, privately owned, public owned, or hunting or non-hunting, where people wiped out all their wildlife. Of course, then you don't have a product. Remember, they breed. If you've got 100 blesbok, the next season you've got 150 or 140, depending on the rate that they breed. I mean, blesbok more or less, they've got a 27% breeding rate that they do. So if you've got 100, the next year you've got 127. And the year after you've got more. So you need to manage them. Either selling them at auction, if you're going just for photographic safaris and ecotourism, or hunt them. But at the end of the day, somewhere we're going to have consumptive usage to manage our wildlife. As I explained to you, we've got all game reserves in Africa fenced, and we need to look after carrying capacity. That's the same with elephants. That's why we're moving elephants all around the world. We've got too many elephants in Southern Africa, especially Zimbabwe, Namibia, South Africa, Botswana.
Well, you can't give an elephant away for free in South Africa right now. Like where would you take an elephant in South Africa?
Yeah, private sector, very, very few private sector guys have the area capacity to host elephant because you need quite a big area.
Pete, let me ask you just a basic question, which you probably will take and take to lots of different places, but a very basic question, which we often are faced in the hunting world, is this.
Yes.
Does hunting, and I'll then convert it a little bit, does consumptive use of wildlife, hunting, help people and wildlife in South Africa? Very broad question. How would you say yes, no? How do you answer that?
Okay, definitely yes. because I've seen it and our research shows it. Let's look at people. I mean, if you look at the normal farm, and like maybe just a bit history, I mean, when we started to realize that there's economic value in wildlife in the 1960s, 1970s, we started to convert normal cattle farm, crop farms to game reserves. So that's the first positive. So now you're creating new game reserve, new natural areas, which was normally overgrazed, and you've got lots of fences on it and those things. So your normal cattle farm, if you look at the number of people employed versus the number employed on the game reserve, are 3 or 4 times more. Our recent stats show that the average game farm in South Africa employed 17.7 people, permanent and temporary. Permanent about 14 people, and with the temporary guys around about 17 per game farm. So when we look at our latest stats, which we did, we only the game farms employ 177,000 people in South Africa.
177,000.
Yes, that's employed based on our latest statistics.
Okay.
If you look at where are they employed, it is rural areas. It's your Limpopo province, your Northwest province, Northern Cape, Free State. So rural provinces, okay, Northwest got the Sun City, but and some of part of Limpopo's got the Kruger National Park, but otherwise there's no big tourism destinations. So they create job opportunities in the rural areas, first thing. Now also you need to create skills. Because if you're looking at tourism, you need maybe a tour guide, or you need a hunting guide, a PH, professional hunter. You need skinners, you need trackers, you need people working in the lodge, which create new skills. It's not just like farming. And not that I'm against farming, I'll just give an example. I mean, guys from the farming industry must not crucify me. I'm not against farming, I'm just explaining it. So regarding that, it creates skills opportunities and it creates job opportunities in areas where we don't have big job creators. So that is, for me, people-wise, very important. Wildlife-wise, as I said, if we look back in the 1970s, 60s, where we almost extend the bontebok, almost extend the mountain zebra. For example, the mountain zebra has been taken off red list now. Why? Because people bought wildlife. They want to show these rare endangered species to people, and such extent, but now you find them all over. In areas where they are allowed. The bontebok is mostly Free State area. You can't move them all around South Africa, but in those areas you find them. Sable and roan are examples. I mean, we've got such a healthy populations of sable and roan antelope now in South Africa that it's not endangered really anymore. And that is a contribution because the private sector first see, okay, here's opportunity for tourism and hunting from this wildlife. I can generate income from it on my piece of land. Maybe more as that I do with normal cattle farming. And remember, wildlife also fits more in our environment. Due to global warming and these things, we experience more droughts in South Africa. Different seasons is changing and things, it's all over the world. But your wildlife adapts better to us. So it makes sense to have wildlife rather than cattle farming where you need to dip them against ticks and all these parasite things. And wildlife is adapted to us.
So it's good. There are certainly impacts, economic impacts, because of hunting in South Africa, no doubt.
No doubts about it. There's more wildlife on private land, South Africa, and most of the private land in South Africa is hunting farms. There's more wildlife in South Africa than on all our game reserves in South Africa, including Kruger National Park. If you look at the hectares combined by South African national parks, it's in the vicinity of, and with your provincial parks, on a correction, I think it's about 6 to 7 million hectares of land. The private wildlife industry is estimated. Some by say 15 million hectares, some say 20 million hectares. So it's 2 or 3 times the size of all, if you put it together, in all our provincial and national protected areas like our national park and provincial park. So if one takes that away, Robbie, I mean, what chunk of protection will you take away of wildlife in South Africa? What part of where conservation takes place on these places do you take away? And if you go to these game reserves and you look at what the guys do, they certainly look at to manage their environment well. Because if they don't have enough grass, if there's too much trees coming in, they need to manage this thing, and they look at erosion and all these things. So they've got very good conservation management practices that they do apply. Because a tourist or a hunter don't want to drive around on a farm and there's nothing, no trees, there's no grass. You can see that the conservation management of this game reserve is not good. I mean, we don't hunt with stupid people. If you look at, and sorry for that word, but if you look at the qualifications of these guys, most of them's got a very good qualification and degree. So you work with educated people, and they can quickly see that you look after your nature or not.
And it makes sense. Again, it comes back to the idea of it's an economic asset, right? You're selling a product. And so to be able to continually sell a product, you have to have clients, people who are purchasing the product that go, oh, I like that. I'm going to tell other people about it. It was good. It was clean. It looked great. Everything looked healthy. You know, it wasn't just a free for all kind of scenario, because that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about your accommodation. Again, I'm coming back, you're selling a wildlife experience. And remember, we've got so many products in South Africa, so you need to do something to be better than your neighbor. Everyone can sell gemsbok and kudu, but you need to improve your wildlife. You can see you've got better wildlife management. You've got the advantage. People will come back to your place.
So, Pete, the reason I found you is that I heard about your work at the Custodians AGM back in November, and it was through some economic impacts. And you haven't published it yet, but you've got some really good statistics on economic impacts of the wildlife ranching industry in South Africa.
Yes, no, we are in the process. I'm as we speak, I'm this morning worked on the article which we want to send to a peer-reviewed journal. So hopefully by the end of the year, I've got it published by peer-reviewed. But the reports are out, which we did for the custodians. And as I said, I also work with Economist, Andrea Simons. She's economist here at our university. So I can just give you some numbers quickly. I just want to
give us some numbers.
Just give me a second here. Okay, as I said to you, the South African hunters spent in the area of 63,000 Rand per season.
And these are your biltong hunters, right? You would consider South African hunters biltong hunters, local hunters?
Biltong hunters, meat hunters, this is the local hunters. Some of them do hunt for trophy purposes. Some of them would like a nice gemsbok horns or kudu horns, but they use the meat. I mean, these guys, they eat meat. You know the program Meat Eater in the US. So they eat meat. They like game meat. And you can explain to your guests what is biltong.
And I think Americans would take the meat and eat the meat too, but we just can't bring it back. That's the problem.
Well, all the overseas hunters would like to take the meat back. I mean, we've got lots of Arabian hunters, European hunters, and the closest that they get to taking the meat back is by eating something that they hunted here in South Africa. So lots of the outfitters will maybe make a nice fillet for them coming from their hunt also. But yes, that's another discussion one day that we can speak about the legislation regarding game meat in South Africa, which is a big problem. But the South African hunter hunts for meat. He spends around 63,000 Rand per year. He hunts between 2 or 3 times a year, and he stays about 4 days at the hunting destination. That's a South African hunter. If we multiply that by the estimated hunters in South Africa, and some people say we're overestimating, some said we're underestimating the number of dedicated hunters, but I think we're a bit underneath. But I like to work with this number because due to but we don't keep good statistics in South Africa, we don't have a precise number. But we work with 200,000 hunters. If we multiply that by the spending, we end up with 12.6 billion Rand per year generated by income by hunting. And if you look at that breakdown, 7 billion of that is game hunted. So that 7 billion stays at the game farms because that's where the games are, and that's in the rural areas. And then the other cost is obviously transportation. Now, transportation, accommodation, some of the equipment ends up to 5.3 billion Rand. So that makes the two bigger chunks out of that spending, if you look at that way. And that is spent between the provinces as you travel, if you need to stay over, if you need to buy ammunition of those type of things. So that is included therein. So that is a 12.6 billion. If one look at our international hunter, they spend a bit more, but we subtracted some of the leakages. For example, we subtracted their spending to South Africa, which was around about $6,500 US, because, I mean, that is not spent here. We also subtract some of the clothing that they buy, 50%, some of the taxidermy costs. We also excluded 50%. There's lots
And
of
those are
costs.
excluded costs because it's actually not happening in South Africa, is what you're saying, right?
It's not part of South Africa's economy. The amount that we came up that we do spend in the South Africa economy was, let me just quickly check here, was $25,473. That was what they spent on a 9 to 10 day hunt. And that is 450,000 rand that we spend. Now, again, as I said, what other international tourists will spend that amount of money in a 2-week vacation to South Africa? So,
Pete, did you have a comparison? Do you have a comparison do you have a comparison of an ecotourist coming? Like, what is a typical international ecotourist spending when they come to South Africa?
Yeah, difficult question. We struggle to get information because the platforms where you can do research is very difficult. I mean, you need to tap into the low private sector, and they're sometimes not that willing to give you some information. But what I can tell you is that I know that some of the latest stats by Stats SA revealed that 41 billion is spent by local tourists in South Africa. Now, if local tourists spend 41 billion, according to their calculations, and our local hunters spend almost 14 billion, you can see it's only about 200,000 people versus a couple of million people. It must tell you that the spending per person per hunter is, it's much better or more than your local tourist or your international tourist. But I can come back to you. We struggle to get information on that, as the way they capture information as international tourists coming to South Africa is not always correct. So that is a struggle. And they always combine it with different places that they visit. It's not maybe they go to Cape Town, but they also visit a game reserve. So it's very difficult to capture it. But if one look at that 450,000 and you multiply it by the number of international hunters we received last year, which was 6,242, that is 2.8 billion. But the international smaller group that comes in, they spend more per person, but in total they spend lesser than our South African hunters. Obviously, volume counts.
Yeah, what was it? So the number was 12 billion, right? So it's 2.4 billion versus 12 billion.
Yeah, 2.8 billion versus 2.5, 2.7 billion.
Okay.
So in total, and I can give you the total here, the total economic contribution of hunting is 15.5 billion per season. So it's quite an enormous amount that we are spending here.
And as you said earlier, more than likely being spent in the rural economies in South Africa.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a small part, if you look at your international hunter, they go on a pre and post tour, which they more or less spend around about $1,000 to $2,500 per pre or post tour, according to our stats. And there's normally about 3 or 4 days. So they come for a hunt and afterwards they go Cape Town or they go Kruger National Park. So we can't say that has been spent in the hunting industry. And I think about 40% of their spending is on the game reserve for game hunted, if I could remember correctly. So yes, and if you look at the South African hunter, more than 50% is spent at the game reserve on game hunted. So all that money, again, go back to the game farm owner, which improve his conservation area, improve his game farm, buy new species, buy new genetics, do improvements on his lodge, go for marketing, and all those type of things. And of course, employment, because you need to pay your people.
Pete, let me ask this as a sort of last question here. One of the things that I heard about ecotourism versus hunting tourism is how do I say this? The location of where the money ends up.
Okay.
I don't know if you have any thoughts here. So the reason what I'm bringing up here is from a hunting tourism perspective, as you just mentioned, hunting tourism dollars goes to the game farm owner. He's fixing pipes, he's fixing fences, he's building, he's whatnot. He's doing a lot of stuff on the farm because he lives on the farm. Yeah. From an ecotourism perspective, you're spending your money, with an ecotourism operator, with a lodge. Yes, the lodge is employing some folks. Often the lodge is owned by someone international. It's not owned by the people right there. It's not their place. But sometimes it is. I'm trying to I don't want to be biased here one way or another, but I've seen some statistics where ecotourism money the vast majority doesn't actually hit the ground in the place that you're actually doing the tourism.
Yeah, if you look at the hunting, I mean, most of your marketing by your South African guys is done by the hunting outfitter, which is the owner of a business. They don't really work for a broker like they do with ecotourism. I mean, you've got your ecotourism broker maybe in the UK, and they market, so they take a cut and then they send the guys over here. Whereas here, it is basically done by the owner of the land itself. So that is already a positive point. They don't use a middleman, if I can call it that way. Yes, there are game farms which do hunting that is owned by international guys. I mean, there's some Arabian-owned game farms, there's American-owned game farms. But in percentage-wise, it's much lesser than what I think is in the ecotourism industry. If you look at one of our hotspots, ecotourism destinations, Sabi Sands, those areas along to Kruger, a number of those lodges, and not just those, are sometimes owned by international guys. Yes, and again, some of the money go out. But we must also remember that some of that money, at least some also stay here in South Africa, because they also need to improve, if they do it the correct way, they need to improve their wildlife populations in the sense of better genetics, variety of species, because your photographic tourist or your ecotourist, they want more variety of game that we want to see and take photos of. Whereas your hunter, he's maybe satisfied with less variety of game as long as he hunts something nice and be in the veld. So both years do have a leakage or export of income to outside countries, but I think that ecotourism is on a larger scale than your hunting industry.
Pete, what's your outlook, thoughts to the future of wildlife conservation in South Africa?
Yes, Robbie, we've got so many battles to fight in South Africa, and I don't want to bore you with that. I mean, one is that I mentioned regarding the game meat. There's also now sort of onslaught on private ownership of wildlife that they want to take it away. We sometimes get the feeling that our government, from our Department of Environmental Affairs, they don't really want to support the hunting industry because they're not streamlining permits issues. They struggle to get permits. They struggle to get their license renewed. And I don't know what is the motive behind it. I can't really tell you why and what is the issue. But if we're going to lose the wildlife industry in South Africa, or the hunting industry at least, let's say the hunting industry, we're going to lose a lot of job opportunities. We're going to lose a lot of land for conservation where we do hunting. There's more onslaught on the trophy hunting because lots of people feel that you just hunt animals for your pleasure and you don't eat it. So in a sense, trophy hunting there's much more movement against trophy hunting by boycotting the trophies to being exported. I mean, some of the airlines industries in South Africa or over the world don't even export the trophies on their planes anymore. It's been banned. So they try to make it as difficult as possible. But at the end of the day, what are we going to lose? We're going to lose land for conservation. We're going to lose a decrease in wildlife numbers. Remember, your farmer's got that piece of land. So he wants to do the best business there, of best economic profits from out of that piece of land. So if hunting is difficult, they will move back to cattle farming or they will move back to crop farming. We've seen it. We've seen it after COVID when we had hard times and people don't receive, especially those guys from which focus on the international market. I mean, for 1 year they were closed, no hunting taking place. And the second year, about 30 or 40% of the hunters came in. So there's no financial gains in that land for them. They will divert to something different. Back to crop farming, back to cattle farming because they need to make a living. So that is a big problem. And indirect, we're going to lose conservation land, we're going to lose wildlife numbers, definitely. And of course, you're going to lose people employment. People are going to lose their job, and we're also going to lose skills because people move on, they lose their skill. And that's going to have a tremendous impact on wildlife in South Africa.
No, well said, Pete. Well, I appreciate your time, man. I know that you've got another appointment coming up, and I just wanted to connect and say thank you. I appreciate the research you're doing from an economics perspective. I don't think there's very many people doing economic impacts in the hunting space and sort of the critical data around the impact of hunting, which at the end of the day, when we talk about, what is going to happen if hunting is banned, the stuff that you're doing to say, look, there's people that are employed, a lot of people that are employed, lots of land that is conserved, lots of wildlife that's being managed and moved around because of it. That's going to suffer.
Yeah, I think it's a very big educational thing that we need to do, and that's why I'm glad you guys got these platforms where you educate people, because we do receive a lot of international students in our university. There's a guy that I work with. He bringing students from overseas, mostly focusing on veterinary services, but they don't have experiences overseas as we have with wildlife. I mean, we've got some of the best veterinary services or vet guys in South Africa working on wildlife, which is also endangered if you lose this wildlife industry. But they come and learn, and lots of our discussions, we start to speak about hunting, and then they're against hunting. And then I explain to them. I explain to them consumptive usage. I explain to them we've got the carrying capacity. I explain to them how it works. And afterwards they come back to me and say, "Sir, Prof, now I understand, but nobody explained it to me. I support you now. I'm not against hunting anymore." So we need to educate people, because people see a news bulletin or something written in a newspaper about the animal being killed from a vehicle, or a hunter sits there with an animal and it's not a good photo. And then they say, yeah, this industry is bad for us and we want to stop it. But we need to educate people and show them how it works. And if you look at South Africa and you look in the world, if we can use consumptive usage sustainably, why not? Why not?
Exactly.
I mean, that's why we've got this planet we've got here. And if it's used sustainably, and we've been proving now for the last 40, 50 years that we use wildlife sustainable in South Africa, where we've got more numbers. If we had less numbers than 50 years ago and less conservation areas due to hunting, I would have said, oh, stop hunting. But I mean, there's proof. We see it. We see it in Namibia. We see it in Botswana. We see it in South Africa. Zimbabwe, before they had their political problems in 2001. We've seen these things. And if you go to countries where they stopped hunting, like Kenya, they've got a decrease in wildlife numbers, because that wildlife has no value for people, and they just, if you don't kill it, I kill it, because there's no value. I just want to eat it.
Thank you, Pete. Much appreciate your time, my man.
Okay, Robbie, have a wonderful day.